5:17 in the morning. A single yellow bulb above the stove, and a woman's hands pressing a collar flat, slow, deliberate, as if preparing for a battle. Outside, the whole neighborhood still slept. Only this kitchen was awake. Only this iron moved. The shirt was blue. Slightly too large in the shoulders. Bought with the hope that a boy would grow into it before he needed it for something important. He almost had. 26 years later, the same man walked through the airport like a person going to work. No assistant. No security detail. Just a slim leather briefcase, and a cashmere sweater the color of a storm cloud, chosen specifically, because it announced nothing. That was the point. Because on that 19th flight, someone looked at him. And decided something. Before ever looking at his ticket. The first glass of champagne had not yet been poured. Birmingham, Alabama. 5:17 in the morning. The kitchen light was the only light on in the whole neighborhood. A single bulb above the stove. Pale yellow. The kind that doesn't illuminate so much as hold back the dark just enough to work by. Gloria Okafor stood at the ironing board, with her back straight, and her eyes down. The iron moved slow. Deliberate. She wasn't rushing. She never rushed the collar. The collar was the thing people saw first. Her son had told her once that he already knew what to wear. She'd handed him the iron, and told him to go ahead then. He'd given it back without a word. He was 19. He ate toast standing up that morning. Didn't sit. Didn't need to. His mind was already somewhere else. Already in a conference room in Atlanta. Already shaking hands. Already 3 sentences into a presentation he'd rewritten 11 times in the last 2 weeks. He knew those sentences the way other boys knew song lyrics. The Meridian Foundation. Full funding. For years. The kind of opportunity that came around exactly once, and knew it. Gloria pressed the collar flat. Then the left shoulder. Then the right. The shirt was blue. Slightly too large in the shoulders, because she'd bought it expecting him to grow into it before he needed it for something important. He almost had. She didn't say much that morning. She knew her son. Knew the way his jaw set when he was running through something in his head. Knew the particular silence of a boy who was already inside a moment that hadn't happened yet. The most useful thing she could give him right now was not advice. Not encouragement. Not one more thing to carry. Just the shirt. Just the car ride. Just the presence of a woman who had driven him to things his whole life, and never once made him feel like the driving was a burden. She pulled up to the departure lane at Hartsfield-Jackson, and put the car in park. Looked at him. He reached for his bag. "Call me when you land," she said. He said he would. He always did. The line at the gate moved fast. Small crowd for a Tuesday morning. Darnell had his boarding pass on paper. Printed at the library the night before because the printer at home had been out of ink for 3 weeks. The paper had a slight crease down the middle, from being folded into his jacket pocket. He smoothed it against his palm before handing it over. The agent behind the counter was a woman in her 40s. Efficient. The practiced economy of someone who had processed a few hundred of these interactions before 9 a.m. and had long since stopped seeing them as individual moments. She looked at the pass. Looked at him. Looked at the pass again. That second look. Not reading. Reconsidering. "I'm going to need to hold you here just a moment, sir. Is there a problem? The flight is showing capacity issues. We may need to move some passengers to the next departure." He looked past her. The departure board. His flight. On time. No oversell indicator. No flag. Nothing that explained the words she'd just said. But he was 19. And 19 comes with this particular disadvantage. You haven't yet accumulated enough evidence to fully trust your own perception when someone in a uniform contradicts it. You know something is wrong. You can feel it the way you feel weather changing. But you don't yet have the language. You don't yet have the history. You just have the feeling. And feelings, by themselves, don't move gate agents. The man behind him in line was white. Polo shirt. Carry-on slung over one shoulder. Same flight. The agent smiled at him. Scanned his pass. Waved him through without slowing down. Darnell watched him go. Didn't say anything. Sat down in a chair near the window, and watched the gate fill, and empty and fill again. 6 hours. He spoke to 2 other agents. One told him the issue was being resolved. One told him she didn't have information on his specific situation. He called the Meridian Foundation at 8:15 a.m. They were understanding. The slot was at 11. They could not reschedule on the same day. He missed the interview. He did not get the scholarship. When he finally boarded a later flight. Middle seat. Rear of the aircraft. Different crew. He sat down, and he did not allow himself to cry. Not because he wasn't feeling it. He was feeling all of it. The 6 hours of it. The watching the gate fill without him of it. The whole collapsed weight of a morning that had started at 5 a.m., with a pressed shirt and ended here. He didn't cry because he understood something. In the particular, too early way that some people understand things, before they're supposed to. Crying wouldn't change what happened. Crying wouldn't prevent it from happening again. The only thing that might eventually do either of those things was a clarity of mind he needed to protect. Not perform. Protect. He pulled a legal pad from his bag. He wrote down everything. The agent's name. The exact words she used. The time. The departure board status. The sequence. The man who walked through while Darnell waited. Small handwriting. Precise. The handwriting of someone who intends to be able to read this later. He didn't know at 19 what he'd do with what he'd written. He just knew that documentation was the only power available to him in that moment. So he used it. At the bottom of the page, after the facts, after the sequence, after everything he could remember. He wrote one more thing. Not a fact. A decision. An airline. Where nobody decides you belong, before they look at your ticket. He underlined it once. Closed the pad. Looked out the window at the tarmac. He was 19 years old. He had a legal pad, and a one-way ticket home, and something that felt a lot like the beginning of a very long plan. 26 years later. The same man walked through Hartsfield-Jackson International like a person going to work. Which he was. No assistant at his elbow. No security detail 2 steps behind. No carry-on stuff to the limit. Just a slim leather briefcase. A boarding pass on his phone. And a cashmere sweater the color of a storm cloud. Charcoal gray. Chosen specifically because it announced nothing. That was the point. Darnell Okafor was 45 years old. Temples going silver. The kind of still that takes decades to develop. Not stillness from having nothing to feel. But stillness from having decided long ago that feeling was information to be stored. Not a fire to be lit. He traveled the way he did most things. Contained. Deliberate. The unhurried energy of a man who stopped needing to prove he belonged somewhere a long time ago. This was Flight 19. In 3 years of flying his own airline in plain clothes. No announcement. No staff briefing. No one informed except his COO. He had taken 18 flights before this one. 14 had been flawless. 3 had produced small problems. The kind that get handled quietly. 1 gate agent in Phoenix. 1 baggage handler in Denver. Both retrained. Both situations resolved before they became patterns. 18 flights. 17 of them unremarkable. This one. He already knew. Not the specifics. Not yet. But the same instinct that had built something out of nothing across 11 years of work. That instinct was running quiet underneath everything this morning. A background hum. The kind that doesn't sound like a warning until later. When you look back, and realize it always did. He walked past the priority check-in counter. The agent behind the marble desk was 27. Maybe 28. Dark hair pulled back. Uniform pressed with the care of someone who has been at the job long enough to take it seriously. Not so long that it has taken something from her. She looked up when he approached. Typed his name. Her posture changed. Subtle. A slight straightening. A softening around the eyes. The micro-adjustment of a person who has just received information that reclassifies the interaction entirely. Of course, Mr. Okafor. Seat 2A. Your usual. She didn't ask for ID. She didn't need to. Darnell thanked her by name. Habit from childhood. His mother had worked hotel rooms for 28 years. Guests rarely looked at her face long enough to read the name tag. He'd been 9 years old, and impatient about something. He couldn't remember what anymore. And she'd told him, every person you speak to has a name. Using it costs you nothing. Means everything. He'd never forgotten. He walked to priority boarding. The corridor was carpeted and dim. A signature scent. Vanilla and warm leather. That he had personally approved during the 2021 rebrand. The design team had laid out 12 options on index cards. He smelled each one. Pointed to the second, from the left without hesitation. He was right. He was usually right about the things other people considered too small to have opinions about. The first-class cabin of Prestige Atlantic was small and exact. 8 seats. Each one a window. Cream leather. Overhead lighting at warm amber. Not the cool blue-white, that made faces look like they were being interrogated. But the amber, that made everything look like it was being considered. Tray tables that unfolded, with the smooth resistance of good engineering. Darnell took his seat. Placed his briefcase under the seat in front. Boarding pass on his phone. Phone face down on the armrest. He took in the cabin. Fast. Completely. Filed it. Seat 1A. Constance Whitfield. 63. A cream blouse, with the collar turned precisely up. A monogrammed leather carry-on occupying the overhead bin, with the ease of someone who has never seriously considered that someone else might also need that space. Phone in one hand. An opinion of the surrounding environment she hadn't quite gotten around to expressing yet. But she would. The expression was already there. Waiting for the right moment to become words. Seat 2C. Conrad Wiley. 72. Silver-haired. Gold-rimmed reading glasses sitting low on a nose that had broken and healed at some point decades back. A slight leftward drift that didn't affect his appearance so much as give it a kind of history. A legal thriller open on his lap. The bookmark was a folded receipt. His eyes moved at the measured pace of someone actually reading. Not the rapid flutter of someone performing it. 41 years on the federal bench. Darnell didn't know that yet. He would. Row 4. Jonah Trevino. 26. Camera bag at his feet. Phone propped against the tray table at a slight upward angle. The alertness of a person who is always watching. Not anxiously. Professionally. 1.2 million subscribers. He made films about things that happened in ordinary spaces. He'd come on this flight to shoot a travel video. He had no idea. None. Row 5. Priya Nolan. 28. Earbuds in. Phone in hand. Scrolling in the way people scroll, when they're not really looking at what they're seeing. Processing the world through peripheral attention. Catching everything without appearing to watch anything. 1.4 million followers on Instagram. She described herself in her bio as a storyteller. Which was accurate. Which was why the moment she settled into her seat, some instinct she'd developed over 4 years of documenting real life. Switched on and stayed on. She hadn't touched her earbuds since they crossed 10,000 feet. Then Beverly Hartwell appeared. She arrived at the entrance of the first-class cabin the way some people arrive at parties they are hosting. Not as a guest. As the person who decided how the evening would go. Her uniform was pressed to a sharpness that bordered on aggressive. The navy fabric had no wrinkles. Not one. In a way, that suggested this was not the result of a good iron, but of a conviction that wrinkles were a form of personal failure. Lipstick coral. Applied with the precision of someone who checked every reflective surface on the way here. Her gold name badge caught the cabin light and threw it back in 3 directions. 16 years with Prestige Atlantic. 8 of them in first class. She said that number. 16. The way other people said their net worth. Slowly. Letting you feel the weight before she continued. She moved through the cabin the way she always moved, through the cabin. With warmth. With the practiced ease of a woman who has performed this ritual so many times it has become instinct. Who understands that the ritual itself is part of the product. Not just the champagne. The manner of the champagne. The way you pour it. The way you smile when you do. She stopped at seat 1A. Mrs. Whitfield. The smile was warm. Real looking. Specific. Your trip to New York. Business or pleasure? Constance Whitfield accepted the attention, with the practiced grace of someone long accustomed to being recognized. A thin smile. A brief reply. Beverly moved. Row 3. A couple. Mid-40s. Well-dressed. The easy comfort of people who travel often enough that first class feels like a slightly nicer version of normal. Brief exchange. Weather in New York. Estimated flight time. The woman laughed at something Beverly said. Beverly laughed back. The practiced warmth ran on a very reliable engine. Then row 2. Seat 2C. Conrad Wiley looked up from his book. Good morning. Beverly, good morning, sir. Lovely jacket. Conrad nodded. Returned to his page. A genuine exchange. 2 people who had no investment in performing beyond what the moment required. Then seat 2A. Beverly looked at Darnell Okafor. The smile didn't disappear. It shifted. Same physical arrangement of features. The curve of the lips. The tilt of the chin. The practiced professional nod. But the warmth left it. The way warmth leaves a room when someone opens a window. Not all at once. Completely. And faster than you expected. What remained was the technical infrastructure of a smile, without any of its substance. She gave it to Darnell the way you hand change to someone, without making eye contact. No name. No greeting. No warmth. And then she moved on. Conrad Wiley turned a page. His eyes did not follow the words. They tracked Beverly, as she made her way back toward the galley. 41 years in courtrooms had given him this. An ability to distinguish between a mistake and a choice. They looked different. They felt different in a room. A mistake had a kind of ambient apology around it. An uncertainty. A reaching back quality. What he had just watched had no such quality. He said nothing. But he was no longer reading. In the galley, Adrian Meeks was restocking the snack drawer, with the focused efficiency of someone who has learned that staying busy is the same as being invisible. 31 years old. 2 years with the airline. 18 months in economy class. 6 months up here. He had the posture of a person who has learned that keeping his head down costs less than holding it up. Beverly stepped past him without looking at him. Began checking the champagne cart. 4 bottles of Moët. 16 stems. Everything polished. Everything in its place. She positioned the cart, with the attention of a surgeon reviewing instruments, before an operation. Everything in this cabin was exactly as it should be. That's what Beverly believed. She was wrong about that. She just didn't know it yet. 25 minutes after takeoff. Cruising altitude. Georgia giving way to South Carolina below the clouds. Beverly rolled the champagne cart out of the galley. Straight-backed. Unhurried. The smooth confidence of a woman who has performed this ritual hundreds of times. Who understands that the ritual itself is part of the product. She positioned the cart at the entrance of first class. Straightened her vest. Began. Row 1. Mrs. Whitfield. Warm smile. Specific warmth. Your favorite vintage. Constance accepted the glass, without quite looking at Beverly. The way you accept a glass, from someone whose job is to fill it. Row 3. The couple. Brief, easy. A comment about the afternoon arrival time in New York. The woman smiled. Beverly smiled back. Row 2. She poured for Conrad in 2C. Steady hands. The neck of the bottle angled perfectly. Not a drop misplaced. Then. She gripped the cart handle. And pushed it forward. Past seat 2A. Without slowing. Without glancing. The way you walk past the street you've already decided not to turn down. Darnell watched the last glass fill. Watched Beverly push the cart back toward the galley. He waited. Exactly long enough. Then raised one hand. Not sharply. Not dramatically. Just the calm, measured gesture of a man accustomed to being answered. Excuse me. His voice was level. Even. I believe you missed my row. Beverly stopped. The cart handle still in her hands. She stood there for a moment, with her back to him. And the pause was long enough. Just barely long enough. For anyone paying attention to understand that this was not the pause of a person surprised. This was the pause of a person deciding. She turned around slowly. I didn't miss anything. From seat 1A, Constance Whitfield looked up, from her phone. Beverly's voice was pleasant. The most precise word for it. Not warm. Not cold. Pleasant the way a locked door is pleasant, when it has good paint on it. In row 4, Jonah Trevino had stopped arranging his shot. He was watching. His right hand drifted to the camera bag at his feet. Slow. The kind of movement you make, when you don't want to disturb the air. In row 5, Priya Nolan had removed one earbud. Her phone was in her hand. It had been in her hand for several minutes. Beverly set the champagne bottle on the cart. Hard enough that the stems rattled in their holders. Then she reached, into the pocket of her navy vest. Withdrew a small linen napkin. Shook it open, with a practiced flick of her wrist. And began to wipe the armrest next to Darnell. Slowly. Deliberately. Long, even strokes across the cream leather. The way you clean a surface, after something unpleasant has touched it. Her full attention on the armrest. Not on Darnell. The armrest required her focus. The armrest needed to be restored. She did this in full view of the cabin. She did not look at him once. The woman in 1A had been scrolling her phone. She stopped scrolling. Conrad's eyes had lifted, from his page, before the napkin was even fully unfolded. The couple in row 3 had been speaking quietly to each other. They weren't speaking anymore. Beverly folded the napkin. Placed it back in her vest pocket. Then she looked at Darnell and said it. Champagne service is for passengers, who belong in this cabin. And I'm not certain you do. The cabin did not gasp. That would have been too easy. Too clean. The kind of reaction that releases tension rather than builds it. What the cabin did was something worse. It went still. Not quiet. Still. There is a difference. Quiet is the absence of sound. Still is the absence of movement. Because every person in the room has stopped doing whatever they were doing, and is now holding themselves in place. Waiting to see which way this goes. Not sure they want to be part of it. Not sure they can look away. 7 passengers in first class. Not one of them opened their mouth. Darnell did not argue. Did not raise his voice. Did not demand to speak to the captain. Did not reach for his boarding pass, and wave it in Beverly's face. He looked at her. One long moment. Steady. Direct. The look of a man who is filing something away rather than reacting to it. The difference between those two things is enormous. Filing is cold. Filing is patient. Filing keeps. Then he turned toward the window. Outside. 30,000 feet below. Georgia was a patchwork of brown and green that looked peaceful from this altitude. As most things do, when you're far enough away from them. Darnell's hands rested in his lap. Breathing even. Face showing nothing at all. The stillness of a man who has been here before. Not on this plane. Not in this seat. But in this moment. Yes. The specific moment of being looked at and decided about, before a single word has been exchanged. He has been in this moment. More times than he counts anymore. More times than anyone should be. Beneath the armrest, away from every eye in that cabin, his right thumb found his phone. He didn't call yet. Not yet. He had learned. At 19. With a legal pad in an airport. 6 hours of waiting behind him, and a missed interview ahead. That timing matters. That reacting in the middle of something is different from responding when you have all of it. When what you do is not a reflex, but a record. He learned that lesson once. He never needed to learn it twice. Beverly walked back to the galley, with the casual ease of a woman who has said what she said, and has made complete peace with it. Who is not waiting for a response, because she doesn't believe a response is coming, that she will need to take seriously. Which was the most important mistake she had made so far. Not the most consequential. That was still coming. But the most important. Because she had looked at the man in seat 2A, and seen something static. Something that would absorb what she'd done, and sit quietly, and eventually disappear. She had seen that. She had been completely wrong. In the galley, Adrian Meeks was still at the snack drawer. He had heard everything. Every word. He kept his eyes down. Kept his hands moving. Almonds. Mixed nuts. Small chocolate squares. Arranging and rearranging things that were already arranged. The pull between what he'd heard, and what he was doing, with the information was almost physical. He could feel it. The discomfort of a person, who knows the right thing, and is doing the other thing, and is very aware of both facts simultaneously. He'd been with Prestige Atlantic 2 years. 18 months in economy class. 6 months up here. First class was better in every technical sense. The passengers were calmer. The work was less physically demanding. The tips were real money. But the power structure was different. Down in economy, the senior attendants were mostly collegial. Up here, everything ran through Beverly. Her assessments. Her sign-offs. His 6-month review was in 3 weeks. Senior attendant status. A different pay grade. He needed that. Or he told himself he needed it. Which isn't the same thing. But feels identical from the inside. So he kept his hands moving. And did not walk out of the galley. Not yet. Conrad Wiley had stopped pretending to read. His book was still open. The receipt bookmark still in place. But his eyes were on the galley curtain. Then on seat 2A. Then back to the curtain. 41 years. 41 years of rooms, where people revealed themselves, through the things they chose not to do. The unsigned document. The skipped question. The witness who looked at the jury instead of the defendant. The uninvited nod. The skipped greeting. The imperceptible dimming of regard. Not mistakes. Choices. He knew the difference. In the way you know a scent, that takes you somewhere, before your conscious mind has caught up. He turned a page he wasn't reading. Said nothing. Not yet. Priya Nolan had opened Instagram. Her followers were awake. They were always awake. Some combination of time zones, and insomnia and the endless scroll, that had become the background radiation of modern life. She held the phone at the angle she'd developed, over 4 years of doing this. Slightly tilted. The front-facing camera angled toward the forward section of the cabin, without being obvious about it. She hadn't gone live yet. Still deciding. Because she'd been doing this long enough to know, that there's a difference between capturing something, and changing it by capturing it. Between witness and participant. The line between those two things was thin. She had crossed it in both directions before. She knew how each crossing felt afterward. She kept the phone in her hand. Kept watching. Jonah Trevino had unzipped the camera bag. One slow movement. The zipper barely audible. He had not raised the camera. Not yet. He simply held it in his lap, with the lens angled slightly upward, and his hand very still. The patience of a person who has learned. By getting it wrong more than once. That the most important thing in documentary work is to not disturb the thing you're trying to see. The record light was not on. Not yet. Beverly reappeared. She came out of the galley the way she'd gone in. With the straight-backed unhurried authority of a woman on her own terrain. She had a champagne bottle. Adrian saw her pick it up. He said her name. Quietly. Beverly. His voice barely at speaking volume. She did not answer him. She straightened her vest. Checked her name badge with 2 fingers. Walked back into the first-class cabin. She went to seat 1A. Offered Constance a refill. Constance extended her glass, without looking up, from her phone. Beverly poured. Moved to row 3. Brief, warm, efficient. The couple smiled. She reached row 2. Conrad Wiley looked up at her. She didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes were fixed on seat 2A. On Darnell. Who had not moved. Had not spoken. Had not turned his head, since the armrest wipe. Still facing the window. Still with the same patience. The patience that was not nothing. The patience that was something very specific. Beverly lifted the bottle. Tilted it toward his glass. Except there was no glass. There had never been a glass. She had never brought one. The champagne that left the bottle did not go searching for a glass to find. It went where she aimed it. In a slow, deliberate, unbroken stream. Onto the charcoal cashmere of Darnell Okafor's sweater. The sound came, before anyone fully understood what they were seeing. A soft wet sound. Expensive liquid meeting expensive fabric. Distinct and wrong and immediate. Every head in the cabin turned, before the visual registered. Then the stain bloomed. Gold spreading across dark cashmere. Moving outward. Running down the front of the sweater. Tracing the crease of his slacks. Pooling in the leather seam of the seat beside his left thigh. The smell hit the cabin a half-second later. Sharp. Sweet. The specific scent of good champagne in a pressurized cabin at 30,000 feet. And with it, a silence so complete, that the engine hum grew louder by contrast. Darnell did not move. Did not grab the bottle. Did not push Beverly's hand away. Did not stand. Did not speak. He sat in his seat, and let the champagne do what champagne does, when someone pours it, with intent in front of witnesses. He let it finish. Then he turned his head. Slowly. The way he did everything. He looked at Beverly Hartwell for the first time, since she had wiped the armrest. His eyes were steady. Clear. Completely calm. Not the calm of a man, who isn't feeling anything. The calm of a man, who is feeling everything. And who decided, a long time ago, on the basis of long experience, that feeling is information to be stored, and not a fire to be lit. He looked at her the way you look at someone, who has just made the last mistake of their career. And does not yet know it. Beverly pulled the bottle back. She was smiling. The real kind. The kind that comes from genuine satisfaction. The kind that is, in this specific context, the most revealing thing she has done, since she walked into this cabin. So sorry about that. She held the bottle upright. One last drop caught the light, from the rim, and fell onto his left knee. These things happen. She tucked the bottle under her arm. Turned. Walked back toward the galley. The cabin reacted. Not with a gasp. Not with clean collective outrage. With something slower and more complicated. Constance Whitfield pressed her lips together, and dropped her gaze to her phone screen. The couple in row 3 looked at each other. The arithmetic of whether to speak. Arriving at an answer they were not proud of. In row 4, Jonah Trevino was no longer pretending. His camera was on his shoulder. The record light was red. In row 5, Priya Nolan's phone was fully vertical. Her thumb hovered over the live button. Conrad Wiley had closed his book. He had not stood up yet. Not yet. But his book was closed. His glasses were off. His hands were folded on the armrest. And the expression on his face was the one that, if you knew anything about what a federal judge looks like, when he has reached a verdict. Not the deliberation. Not the consideration. But the after. If you knew that look, you would recognize it now. He had been sitting in this cabin since pushback. He had observed everything. And now he was ready for whatever came next. Darnell turned back to the window. The champagne was cooling in the fibers of his sweater. Spreading at the edges. The stain mapping itself across the front of the cashmere in a shape, that from the right angle looked like something being erased. His right thumb found his phone beneath the armrest. He didn't call yet. He looked out at the clouds. That smooth white layer below the aircraft, unbroken as far as the eye could follow. The kind of view that existed only at altitude. That had not once, in 19 flights, failed to remind him of the decision he'd made at 19, with a legal pad in an airport. Something that traveled above all of it. He thought about his mother pressing a collar in a pale yellow kitchen. About the drive to the airport. About what she said, when he got out of the car, and reached back for his bag. "Call me when you land." He thought about the legal pad. The decision written at the bottom, after all the facts. The underline. Then he stopped thinking about the past. Because the present was not finished. And Darnell Okafor had never been a man who left things unfinished. He pressed call. 3 seconds. That's how long the cabin stayed completely frozen, after Beverly Hartwell tucked that champagne bottle under her arm and walked away. 3 seconds of nobody breathing. Nobody moving. Nobody making a sound. And then everything happened at once. Except it didn't feel like everything. It felt like individual people separately arriving at the same horrible understanding. One at a time. Like lights coming on in a building, floor by floor, each one illuminating something that was already there. Priya Nolan's thumb found the live button. She pressed it. Not because she'd made a decision. Because her body made it for her. For years of instinct. For years of knowing that the most important moments announce themselves not with fanfare but with the quality of silence that follows something irreversible. She tilted the phone. Caption typed fast, "Something is happening in this first-class cabin right now. I cannot look away." Hashtag, Prestige Atlantic. Hashtag, Flight Shame. Viewer count, 0. Then 12. Then 40. Then 100 and climbing. In row 4, Jonah Trevino already had the camera on his shoulder. He hadn't announced it. Hadn't asked permission. He simply raised it, with the practiced ease of someone who has spent 4 years learning that the moment you announce the camera is the moment the thing you're trying to capture stops being real. The record light was red. Small. Steady. Burning. He framed the front of the cabin. Beverly's back. The profile of Darnell in 2A, turned slightly toward the window, hands folded in his lap, the dark stain spreading across the cashmere sweater. Still spreading. Still finding new fibers. Still doing what it was put there to do. Jonah had 1.2 million subscribers. He'd made films about things that happened in ordinary spaces. A school cafeteria at 6 a.m. A hospital waiting room at midnight. A bus stop in November rain. He had never. Not once. Not in 4 years. Filmed anything like this. Conrad Wiley was standing. He hadn't rushed. Hadn't pushed himself up, with the urgency of a man making a statement. He'd simply arrived at standing the way a tide arrives at shore. Gradually. Completely. Without needing to announce itself. He set his book on the armrest. Cover up. No bookmark. He was not planning to return to it soon. He removed his reading glasses. Held them loosely by one arm. And he looked at Beverly Hartwell, with the full measured attention of a man who has spent 41 years in rooms where people attempted to present fictions as facts. And who has become, through sheer accumulated experience, extraordinarily accurate at recognizing the moment a fiction collapses under its own weight. "I've been sitting here, since we pushed back, from the gate," Conrad said. His voice did not rise above the ambient hum of the engines. And yet it filled the cabin. Completely. Without effort. The way water fills a glass. Because the vessel was shaped to hold it. Beverly turned. Slowly. The specific slow turn of a woman deciding, before she even faces the room, what expression she's going to wear when she gets there. Sir. The pleasant voice. The locked door pleasantness. Crew matters don't require passenger commentary. Conrad continued. As though she hadn't spoken. Not rudely. With the calm authority of a man long accustomed to finishing his sentences regardless of what interruptions are attempted. You served champagne to every passenger in this cabin. You smiled at each of them. You called Mrs. Whitfield by name. You complimented my jacket. He paused. Brief. Exact. You did not check a single boarding pass. Not one. The pause he let follow, that sentence was not accidental. It was the pause of a man who has delivered verdicts. Who knows that some sentences need a moment of air around them before the next one lands. And the only passenger you refused. The only one you accused of fraud. The only one whose armrest required cleaning after he touched it. Another pause. Is the only black man on this plane. Silence. The texture of that silence was something you could almost touch. Not empty. Dense. The weight of a room full of people who have just heard something said plainly, that they all already knew. Said out loud. With precision. By someone with the credibility and composure to make the saying of it land like a fact rather than an accusation. Because it was a fact. It had always been a fact. It just hadn't been said yet. Beverly's jaw tightened. 1 degree. The muscular response of a person not accustomed to being named precisely. Sir. I'm going to have to ask you to stay out of crew matters. I'm a retired federal judge. Conrad said it the way he might say he took his coffee black. Information. Not argument. I don't stay out of anything. In seat 1A, Constance Whitfield had put her phone face down on her tray table. Which was interesting. Because Constance Whitfield had not put her phone down once since boarding. She was looking at her hands now. Nail polish. Deep red. Precise. The small gold links of a bracelet she'd had for 30 years catching the amber overhead light. She was not looking at the front of the cabin. She was specifically, deliberately, with evident effort. Not looking at the front of the cabin. Which was its own kind of statement. Priya's viewer count hit 800. Comments moving up the screen in a column she could no longer read individually. Too fast. Just words and partial sentences, and capital letters, and a rolling collective reaction building, into something she could feel in her chest even, through the phone screen. Is this real? Someone call the airline. He hasn't moved once. That woman just. Record everything. Share this now. She angled the phone higher. Kept going live. Beverly had not moved from where she stood. She was at the galley curtain now. One hand on the edge of it. The posture of a person considering a retreat, but not yet deciding. Because retreating would mean something. Retreating would be an acknowledgement that the man in 2C had said something that required retreating from. She was not ready to acknowledge that. Because she had been doing this for 16 years. And in those 16 years she had been threatened with lawsuits. Formal complaints. Letters to the airline. One HR grievance that had gone nowhere and been closed with a notation that said matter reviewed and dissolved like a sugar cube in hot water. People land. They go home. They eat dinner. They forget by Thursday. That was what she believed. Except. Her experience had been shaped, in part, by the fact that 2 of the complaints against her had not been available for anyone to find. Because she had made sure of that. 4 years ago, when the IT department had given her an admin access code to update her own scheduling information. A routine thing. A clerical thing. Nothing significant. She had discovered, by accident and then by deliberate exploration, that the access extended further than it should have. She had used it twice. Then twice more. Until it was just something she did. Until it was just maintenance. Not something she thought about as a choice. Just a thing she did the way you do the things that keep your life in the shape you've decided it should have. She had not considered, not once, that a server upgrade 3 weeks ago had created a backup recovery that her admin deletion could not reach. She didn't know that yet. She was about to find out. But not yet. Go. Beverly's voice pitched low. Private. Except the cabin was quiet enough that Darnell could hear her, if he was listening. Which he was. Tell him we have availability in the rear cabin. He'd be more comfortable there. A pause. Use those exact words. Adrian Meeks appeared at the curtain. He cleared his throat. He walked toward row 2, with the gait of a person delivering a message they did not write, and do not believe. Hands clasped in front of him. He stopped next to seat 2A. Darnell had not turned. Was not going to turn. Sir. Adrian's voice cracked slightly on the single syllable. He cleared his throat again. I just wanted to let you know that we have availability in the rear cabin, if you'd find the experience more comfortable there. Darnell's head turned exactly 1 inch to the right. Just enough to bring Adrian into the edge of his peripheral vision. Not a full turn. Not an acknowledgement of someone worth a full turn. Just enough to register that a person was standing there, with words that needed a response. I'm in my seat. 4 words. No anger. No sarcasm. No inflection that gave Beverly anything to use. Just a statement of fact delivered, with the quiet authority of a man, whose facts don't require emphasis, because they are simply true. Adrian stood there for 3 more seconds. The 3 longest seconds of his professional life. Then he turned around. Walked back to the galley. The posture of a man who went to deliver a message, and came back carrying it. Beverly was waiting. Well? He said he's in his seat. That's it? That's it. Beverly's fingers curled around the edge of the galley counter. Her knuckles shifted. Inside the galley, Adrian Meeks stood very still. He was thinking about the 4 words. I'm in my seat. Not a threat. Not an accusation. Not a performance. Just 4 words in the voice of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and had no interest in explaining it to anyone who hadn't earned the explanation. Adrian was thinking about the walk up the aisle. About his own footsteps. The sound of them. The feeling of them. Walking toward another human being, with instructions to suggest. Politely. Professionally. With the airline's best customer service tone. That he would be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere further back. Somewhere lower. And he had done it. He had walked up there, and said the words. Because of the 6-month review. Because of the senior attendant designation. Because of the arithmetic that people do when they are choosing between what is right and what is safe. And they are very young. And they are very afraid. And the safe option is right there in front of them, dressed up as professionalism. He had done the math. He had chosen the wrong answer. And now he was standing in the galley knowing it. Feeling it in a precise location in the middle of his chest. Not guilt exactly. Something more clinical than guilt. The awareness of a person who has made a choice, and is standing in the immediate aftermath of it, still close enough to see exactly where he went wrong. He looked at Beverly. Beverly. She was already moving. Back toward the champagne cart. I think we should stop. She didn't answer. All of it. Beverly. I think. He stopped. started again. Because here was the thing. Here was the problem. He couldn't say what he actually meant. What he actually meant was, I think you are doing something I cannot defend. I think I have already done something I cannot defend. I think the man in seat 2A said 4 words, that are going to stay with me for a very long time. I think we should stop, before this becomes something none of us can come back from. He couldn't say all of that. So what came out was, I think we should apologize. Beverly had already picked up the champagne bottle. We have nothing to apologize for. She walked past him. Back into the cabin. Adrian stood in the galley, and looked at the curtain gap. Through it he could see the back of Darnell's head. Still toward the window. Still perfectly positioned. Still unchanged. The phones in the cabin were up. 4 of them now. He could hear, faintly, through Priya's small speaker, the rolling text of her live comment section. A waterfall of reaction, from people who were not on this plane. Who were watching, from living rooms, and offices and cars pulled into parking lots to stare at a screen. Adrian closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, nothing had changed. He made his second wrong choice in 20 minutes. He stayed in the galley. He told himself it was, because there was nothing more he could do. He told himself Beverly had made her decision, and that decision was not his responsibility. He told himself a lot of things in those 30 seconds. None of them were true. But they were the things available to him. So he used them. Beverly moved through the cabin the way she always moved, through the cabin. Row 3 first. A refill offer. The couple declined. Brief smile. Efficient. Then row 2. Conrad Wiley looked up at her. His expression was the expression of a man who has stopped expecting something to not happen, and has simply moved on to documenting that it is. She did not acknowledge him. Her eyes were on seat 2A. On Darnell. Who had not moved from the position he'd held since the first pour. Turned toward the window. Hands in his lap. The stain on his sweater drying at the edges now. The gold fading to a darker color. Deeper. More permanent. Beverly lifted the bottle. She tilted it toward his glass. Which still did not exist. And the champagne left the bottle in a second slow deliberate stream, and landed on his left knee, on the slacks, darker fabric darkening further, and Darnell did not move. Did not flinch. Did not make a sound. Beverly said, still nothing in the booking system that confirms this seat. Her voice was steady. Professional. The voice of a person who has decided she is performing a function rather than making a choice. Applying a standard rather than enacting a preference. Conrad Wiley stood up for the second time. This time he did not sit back down. Ms. Hartwell. His voice filled the cabin the way it had before. Without effort. Without volume. I want to account for what this cabin has witnessed. Beverly's chin came up slightly. Sir. You refuse this man's service without cause. The sentence landing, with the flat careful precision of a man reading, from an evidence file he has memorized. You accused him publicly of fraud without evidence. Without checking the system. Without consulting anyone with authority to make that determination. Without any procedure whatsoever beyond your own judgment. He paused. Which I have had ample time to observe. And which I do not find credible. Beverly's lips pressed together. You sent a junior colleague to suggest to this passenger that he would be more comfortable in the rear of the aircraft. Conrad continued. A suggestion delivered not by policy. By your personal preference. Which is not the same thing. And should never be treated as the same thing. The cabin was not breathing. 7 passengers. The captain and co-pilot in the closed cockpit. And this. And you have now poured champagne on this man. Twice. Deliberately. In full view of everyone in this cabin. With the calm of a person who does not believe she will be held accountable for her actions. He looked at Beverly directly. For the first time since standing up. I have tried civil rights cases in federal court. I have reviewed testimony and evidence in more discrimination cases than I will count here. A pause. What I have witnessed on this flight in the last 40 minutes is as clear an act of racial discrimination as I have encountered in my entire career. The silence that followed had a texture. Not empty. Solid. The weight of something named precisely in a room where it had been present, but unnamed for the better part of an hour. Beverly said, "Sir. You are a passenger. This is a crew matter." "Record everything," Conrad said. Not to Beverly. To the cabin. To Jonah. To Priya. To the two other passengers, who had raised their phones, while he was speaking. He said it, with the tone of a man issuing an instruction to a jury. Clear. Final. Non-negotiable. Keep every second of it. Beverly's eyes moved to the phones. 4 of them. 5 now. Red lights. A live stream, with a viewer count climbing past 11,000 on Priya's screen. Something moved behind Beverly's eyes. Not collapse. Not yet. But the first fracture. In a wall that had held for 16 years on the foundation of closed complaint files, and minimum notation resolutions, and the comfortable belief that people landed, and went home, and forgot by Thursday. Recording on an aircraft is against. Isn't, Conrad said. He sat back down. Picked up his book. Crossed one leg over the other, with the settled ease of a man who has made his point, and does not need to stand for it to remain standing. Continue recording. Priya Nolan's viewer count was at 14,000. She lowered the phone slightly. Not to stop. Just to look at the front of the cabin, with her own eyes instead of, through the screen. To confirm with her actual vision what her lens had been capturing. Darnell Okafor had not moved. Since Beverly skipped his row the first time. Not once had he raised his voice, stood up, made a demand, reached for a supervisor, done anything that the situation would have fully justified. He sat in his seat. He looked out the window. He folded his hands. He breathed. Priya said quietly to her phone, "He's been sitting there the whole time. From the moment she skipped his row. He hasn't raised his voice once. He's sitting there." A comment appeared. Rose to the top of the column, and stayed there long enough to read. He already knows how this ends. Jonah had stopped wiping his eyes. He wasn't going to pretend he hadn't been. He was a 26-year-old man, with a camera on his shoulder, filming something he had come nowhere near prepared for. He had been making documentary films for 4 years. He had sat in hospital waiting rooms, and school cafeterias, and unemployment offices. He had filmed a man learning his house was being foreclosed. He had filmed a woman finding out she'd gotten the job, after applying 37 times. He was not prepared for this. He was crying, because he was watching a man, who had been poured champagne on. Twice. Sit with a perfect stillness, that was not defeat. Was not resignation. Was not the stillness of a person absorbing something, because they have no other option. It was the stillness of someone, who had made a decision, so long ago, that the decision was not a decision anymore. It was just who he was. It was just how he moved, through the world. Jonah knew. The way you know things, that arrive not, as thoughts but, as physical certainty. That he was watching something he would spend years trying to adequately describe. He kept filming. Darnell's thumb found his phone. He unlocked it. Scrolled to one name. The name at the top of his contacts. Not because he called it most often, but because some years ago he had moved it there manually, as a kind of reminder, and then had forgotten to move it back, and then decided not to. Claudette Ramsey. Coup. 12 years with the company. 4 in this role. The woman who had been with him when Prestige Atlantic was 3 planes, and a very aggressive line of credit. Who had answered every call, every time. Who had developed, over 12 years, the ability to hear in his voice on the first syllable whether this was routine or not. He pressed call. He turned back toward the window. South Carolina below them now. The clouds thinner here. The earth visible in patches. Brown and green in the long angles of late afternoon light. The geometry of farmland. The silver thread of a river catching sun. It looked peaceful from up here. It always did. Claudette Ramsey picked up on the first ring. She was at her desk in the Manhattan office, when the call came in. Personal number. Darnell's personal number. Which meant exactly one thing. Darnell. I'm on 2261. Atlanta to New York. His voice at the same register it had been all flight. Low. Measured. The voice of a man reporting facts. I need the crew roster. She was already typing. He could hear it. Fast and precise. No wasted keystrokes. Beverly Hartwell, lead attendant. First class. 16 years. A pause. Adrian Meeks, junior attendant. 2 years. Victoria Pham, galley. 3 years. Pull Hartwell's complaint history. The typing stopped for 3 seconds. 3 seconds from Claudette Ramsey was the equivalent of 3 minutes, from anyone else. It was the silence of a person processing information, that is worse than expected, and being very precise about both the processing, and the response. Darnell. Her voice careful. There are 7 complaints on record. 4 years. All marked closed. 2 involve passengers of color. Resolution notes are minimal. Matter reviewed. No action required. By whom? Her previous supervisor. Retired 18 months ago. Silence on Darnell's end. Then, run the backup server. Another pause. Longer this time. Claudette had been with him long enough to know that when he said something that seemed to come from nowhere, it never came from nowhere. IT just finished the migration last week. The recovery archive should be. She stopped mid-sentence. Which was unusual. Claudette Ramsey did not stop mid-sentence. Darnell. What? There are 2 additional files. Deleted from the primary system. The deletion account is. It's registered to Hartwell's admin credentials. Access code issued in 2020 for scheduling updates. A pause, with a different quality than the previous ones. The quality of someone looking at a thing they did not expect to find, and verifying it twice, before saying it out loud. She's been doing this herself. For 4 years. Darnell said nothing for a moment. Outside the window, the river caught the light, and then lost it, as the aircraft banked slightly north. Then he told her what had happened on this flight. Sequentially. Factually. Without inflection. The skipped service. The napkin wipe. The fraud accusation. The boarding pass held and dropped. The economy suggestion via proxy. The first pour. The second pour. He did not say the word outrageous. He did not say appalling. He did not say anything that was not a description of an event in the order the event occurred. The silence on Claudette's end, when he finished, lasted 4 seconds. All 3, she said. Off the system before we land. I want HR and legal at the gate. They'll be there. The complaint history. He kept his voice low. Even. The closed files. The deleted files. The supervisor who signed off. I want to know all of it. Not tonight. Monday, she said. I'll bring everything. A pause. One more thing. Captain. His name is Bassett. He had no part in this. Make sure that's clear in whatever comes next. Understood. The call lasted 73 seconds. Darnell placed his phone face down on the armrest. He picked up the small linen napkin he had been pressing against his sweater, and folded it into a precise square. Placed it on the armrest beside the phone. Turned back toward the window. The clouds had flattened into a smooth white layer below the aircraft. Unbroken in every direction. The kind of view that existed only at altitude. In the galley, Adrian had seen the call. Through the curtain gap. 73 seconds of complete stillness, from the man in 2A. No gesture. No visible distress. No raised voice. Just a man having a conversation that the rest of the cabin couldn't hear. Which was somehow more alarming than anything louder would have been. He stepped away from the curtain. Turned to Beverly. He made a call. Beverly was inventorying the remaining snack selections, with the focused efficiency of a person who was very busy right now, and absolutely could not be disturbed. Let him call. Beverly. The call looked serious. I have been threatened with lawsuits. Letters to the airline. HR grievances. Formal complaints. She set down the bag of almonds she was holding. Turned to face him. Her eyes steady. Completely steady. The eyes of a woman who has been here before and knows how it ends. You know what happened after all of that? Nothing. People land. They go home. They eat dinner. They forget about it by Thursday. She held his gaze. He is nobody. Adrian looked at his hands. Thinking about the 4 words again. I'm in my seat. The way those 4 words had no anger in them. Which was not the same as no feeling. It was something more total than anger. Something that had no name he knew. But that had made his stomach turn in a way he still couldn't account for. I think we should apologize, he said again. We have nothing to apologize for. He looked at the curtain gap. The phones in the cabin. Still up. Multiple phones now. Red lights. He chose, for the second time in 20 minutes, to follow orders he knew were wrong. He had learned somewhere along the way that this was easier than the alternative. He had not yet learned what the alternative cost. He would find out at the end of the jet bridge. But not yet. In the cockpit, Captain Owen Bassett read the priority transmission 3 times. Not because the words were unclear. The words were very clear. 4 sentences. The clearest 4 sentences he had received in 28 years of flying commercial aircraft. He read them 3 times, because the brain, when confronted with information of this magnitude, performs a redundancy check, before accepting it as real. Before allowing what it says to reorganize everything downstream. His co-pilot looked over from her instruments. What is it? Owen took off his headset. Set it on her armrest. Hold altitude, he said. I'll be back. He unbuckled his harness. Stood. Opened the cockpit door. He walked through business class, with the expression he used during unexpected turbulence. Steady. Purposeful. Neither alarm nor casual. The captain's face was a second instrument panel for every passenger on the aircraft. What it showed was what they felt. He kept it calibrated. Kept it even. And stepped through the curtain into first class. The atmosphere of the cabin had the quality of a room where something has already happened, and everyone is still holding the afterimage of it. The phones. 4 of them up now. The retired judge sitting, with his book closed, and his glasses put away. The posture of a man who is done observing, and ready for what comes next. The 2 young people in the back rows, with their cameras, and their live streams, and the expressions of people who came looking for one thing, and found something significantly larger. And seat 2A. Darnell Okafor. Still turned toward the window. The champagne stain drying across the front of the charcoal cashmere. The linen napkin folded on the armrest. The boarding pass still in his lap. The stillness. Owen Bassett looked at that stillness for 2 full seconds. He had been flying for 28 years. He had sat in the left seat, through 2 engine failures. A medical emergency over the Gulf. A passenger who had convinced himself the exit door could be opened at 40,000 feet. In all of those situations his pulse had stayed below 80. Right now it was at 91. Beverly stepped forward. "Captain. Thank you for coming. The passenger in 2A has been. Ms. Hartwell." Not loud. Final. The sentence she was building stopped mid-construction, and did not resume. Owen looked at the cabin. At each person. Slow. Deliberate. He looked at Conrad Wiley, and gave him the brief recognizing nod of a man who has just read a transmission, and understands that the description he received is accurate. He looked at Jonah and Priya and did not ask them to stop filming. Then he looked at seat 2A. He took a breath. "Ladies and gentlemen." The voice he used when the seatbelt sign came on during unexpected turbulence. Steady. Unhurried. Calibrated to make the people listening feel that the situation was being held by someone who knew what to do with it. "I've received a transmission from Prestige Atlantic Airlines headquarters regarding the conduct of the crew on this flight." Beverly's chin came up. Still up. Still the posture of a woman who had been right for 16 years, and intended to continue. She expected to hear the word disruptive. She expected a look toward 2A. She expected to be confirmed. Owen looked at his phone once. Then looked up. Effective immediately, the following crew members are suspended from all passenger-facing duties pending investigation. He did not pause before the first name. Pausing would have been theatrical. Owen Bassett was not theatrical. Beverly Hartwell. Lead flight attendant. The cabin did not react yet. Still absorbing. Adrian Meeks. Flight attendant. Through the gap in the galley curtain, Adrian heard his name, and went entirely still. Victoria Pham. Flight attendant. Beverly made a sound. A laugh. Short. Involuntary. The sound the brain produces, when the information it has received is so fundamentally incompatible with its existing model of reality, that laughter is the only output it can generate in the time available. "Captain." Her voice had the deliberate calm of a person certain there has been a mistake, and prepared to be patient while it is corrected. "I've been with this airline for 16 years. You cannot do this on the basis of." "On whose authority?" Owen said, "On whose authority?" Not a question. A delivery. He turned to seat 2A. The CEO and majority shareholder of Prestige Atlantic Airlines. A pause. The exact length of a breath held, and then released. Mr. Darnell Okafor. The name arrived in the cabin the way a verdict arrives in a courtroom. Not as a surprise exactly. But as a confirmation. The thing you suspected was true is now simply. Irreversibly. True. It lands. And the room reorganizes itself around it. For Jonah and Priya, the name clarified something they had been feeling, without being able to name. The stillness. The patience. The complete total absence of performance. Not because there was nothing to feel, but because outrage was not what this situation required, from a man who had something more total than outrage at his disposal. For Constance Whitfield, the name arrived differently. She had placed her phone face down on the tray table some minutes ago. She looked at it now. Set it face down again. Her deep red nail polish tapped twice against the back of the phone case. She did not speak. For Beverly Hartwell. The name arrived like a system failure. Not instantaneous. Too clean, too dramatic, too much like the cartoonish version of this moment rather than the real one. What happened was slower. And more complete. It started with her posture. The slight involuntary drop of the shoulders. The muscular effort of certainty, which had been holding her upright for the last hour, beginning to release. Then the chin. Not dropping dramatically. Just settling to its natural level. The level it holds, when there is nothing left to perform. Then the hands, which had been clasped at her waist in the composed professional gesture she had maintained throughout. Coming apart now, falling to her sides, with the looseness of objects that have forgotten their purpose. Then the face. She looked at Darnell. Really looked. Not the assessing dismissive glance she had given him, when he boarded. Not the contemptuous appraisal delivered, with the napkin and the pour. She looked at him the way you look at something, when all the noise you've made about it has finally stopped. And you can see it clearly for the first time. She saw a man sitting in his own seat. On his own plane. In his own airline's first-class cabin. Wearing the champagne she had poured on him. Surrounded by passengers, who had recorded every second of what she had done. With the patience of someone, who had always known how this would end. And had simply been waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. The coral lipstick looked very precise against her face right now. Too precise. The kind of precision that reads as effort rather than ease. Mr. Okafor. Her voice had dropped to a register she had not used at any point in the last hour. I didn't know. I had no idea who. Darnell did not look at her. He had not looked at her since the champagne hit his sweater. He was not going to start now. He turned to Captain Bassett. Captain. His voice was the same as it had been all flight. Even. Unhurried. The voice of a man who has never needed volume to be heard. I'd like a glass of champagne. A pause. Exactly one beat. And I'd like to make sure that Ms. Hartwell, Mr. Meeks, and Ms. Pham do not touch a single glass, cart, or passenger on this aircraft for the remainder of this flight. Owen Bassett said, "Yes, sir." And he meant it. Completely. He walked to the galley himself. Took the moat from the cart. The same bottle Beverly had used twice, as a weapon. And poured a glass, with the steady hands of a man who has held the controls through turbulence and knows what it means to keep things level. He carried it back to seat 2A. Set it on the tray table with care. Darnell looked at it. Picked it up. Raised it slightly. Not a toast. Not a celebration. Not a performance for the cabin around him. Just an acknowledgement. Of the glass. Of the man who brought it. Of the simple act of receiving what had been his, from the beginning. He took one sip. Set the glass on the tray table. And turned back to the window. And Conrad Wiley, from seat 2C, watched the shoulder of the man in 2A drop slightly. Just slightly. Just enough. The way a shoulder drops, when a man sets down something he has been carrying for a very long time. Not defeat. Not relief exactly. Something older than both. The exhale of a person who has held himself precisely and correctly through something that required precision and correctness. And who, now that the thing has passed, is allowing himself to be, for one quiet moment, just a man in a seat on a plane. Just a man. Going home. Outside the windows, New York was still an hour away. But it was coming. It was always coming. Conrad Wiley stood up for the last time. Not quickly. Not with the urgent energy of a man making a point. He rose the way he had risen, from the bench for 41 years. With the deliberate, unhurried gravity of a man for whom movement is a considered act. Not a reflex. A decision. He adjusted the sleeve of his jacket, folded his hands in front of him, and looked at the first-class cabin of Prestige Atlantic Flight 2261, with the full patient attention of someone who has spent 4 decades watching rooms. And knowing, with the certainty that only comes from that kind of accumulated witness, exactly when a room needs to be addressed. This was that moment. I want to account, Conrad Wiley said, for what this cabin has witnessed today. His voice didn't rise above the engine hum. It didn't need to. It filled the space the way it always filled spaces. Completely. Without effort. Because the voice of a man who has spent 41 years being listened to carries a weight that has nothing to do with volume and everything to do with the calm authority that cannot be faked and cannot be performed and can only be earned. At no point, since this aircraft reached cruising altitude, has the passenger in seat 2A been disruptive. He let that sit. 1 full second. At no point has he raised his voice, made a threat, used offensive language, behaved in any manner inconsistent with the standard of a first-class passenger. Another pause. Measured. Exact. He asked once to receive the service he paid for. He answered questions directed at him. He has been, in the literal and complete sense of the phrase, a model passenger. The cabin was absolutely still. Beverly Hartwell stood at the galley curtain. Hands at her sides. The hands that had been clasped at her waist for the last hour. Composed, professional, controlled. Now hanging loose. The looseness of objects that have forgotten their purpose. Conrad did not look at her yet. What has happened to him is something else entirely. Now he looked at her. Ms. Hartwell refused him service without cause. She accused him publicly of fraud without evidence. Without checking his boarding pass against the system. Without consulting anyone with the authority to make that determination. Without any procedure whatsoever beyond her own judgment. A pause. Which I have had ample opportunity to observe. And which I do not find credible. Beverly's jaw was tight. 1 degree. The muscular effort of a woman holding her face in place, through force of will. She sent a junior colleague to suggest that this passenger would be more comfortable in the rear of the aircraft. Conrad continued. A suggestion delivered not by system policy. By Ms. Hartwell's personal preference. Which is not the same thing. And should never be treated as the same thing. He let that land. Then, she returned to this cabin, with a champagne bottle, and poured it on him. Deliberately. In full view of every passenger present. With the calm of a person who does not believe she will be held accountable for her actions. He looked at Beverly directly. She was wrong about that. He turned. Slightly. I also want to note for the record. And I use that phrase with its full legal weight. That the passenger in seat 1A offered verbal reinforcement of Ms. Hartwell's conduct at 2 separate points during this incident. Constance Whitfield's phone was already face down on the tray table. She did not look up. Her nail polish. Deep red. Precise. Tapping once against the back of the phone case, and then stopping. Because even that small movement felt like too much. Conrad turned to the cabin. To Jonah. To Priya. To the other passengers, who had raised their phones. You have been recording. He said it the way he said everything in that room. Not as an observation. As an instruction. I want you to keep every second of that footage. Preserve it. What you have captured is not content for a platform. He paused. It is evidence of something that happens every day. In rooms and cabins, and lobbies and offices, where no one is recording. Where there is no retired judge in the next seat. No filmmaker in the row behind. Where there is simply a man being told, in one form or another, that he does not belong. And no one in the room to confirm what he experienced. He looked at Priya. At Jonah. You have something important. Use it responsibly. Then he turned to seat 2A. And what passed between Conrad Wiley and Darnell Okafor in that moment was not easily named. Not pity. Darnell Okafor did not invite pity. And Conrad Wiley would not have offered it. Not admiration exactly. Though there was admiration in it. Something more like recognition. One man seeing clearly what another man has endured. And the weight of knowing that seeing it, naming it, refusing to look away, was both insufficient and necessary. At the same time. I am sorry, Conrad said. His voice did not change. Did not soften into sentiment. It stayed exactly where it had been. Level. Direct. The voice of a man who understands that the most honest things are said plainly. I am sorry this happened to you. I am sorry it happened here. In a cabin you own. On a flight you built. He paused. Because of an assumption someone made about you in the first 10 seconds of looking at you. He paused once more. The longest pause yet. And I am sorry I waited, as long as I did before speaking. I told myself I was observing. He looked down briefly at his folded hands. But there is a point, where observation becomes its own kind of silence. He sat down. The first-class cabin of Prestige Atlantic Flight 2261 was very, very quiet. Not the frozen quiet of the moment, after the pour. Not the held-breath quiet of people waiting to see which way something goes. This was different. This was the quiet of people who have shared something they didn't choose to share. Who are now carrying it. Individually. But not alone. Beverly was still standing at the galley curtain. She had not moved during Conrad's entire address. She had stood there, and let every sentence land the way sentences land, when you cannot dispute them. Because they are not accusations. They are descriptions. Of a sequence of events, that you chose, and cannot unchoose. Her hands at her sides. The coral lipstick still precise. The name badge still catching the amber light. But the posture. That particular posture of 16 years of certainty. Was gone. Not visibly dramatic. Not collapsed. Just gone. The way confidence goes, when the foundation it was built on turns out to have been something other than solid. She looked at Darnell. For a long time. Really looked. And said, one more time, in a voice she had not used at any other point in the last hour, I didn't know. Darnell did not look at her. He had not looked at her since the second pour. He was not going to start now. There was nothing in Beverly Hartwell's face that required a response from him. Not the apology. Which was not quite an apology. Not the shock. Which was not quite shock. Just the slow, visible reorganization of a person confronting a gap between who they thought they were and what they had just watched themselves do. That was Beverly's work to do. Not his. He turned back to the window. New York was 30 minutes out. But coming closer. Always closer. Priya Nolan ended her live session when the landing announcement came through the overhead speakers. She realized she had been live for 47 minutes. 63,000 viewers. Still climbing even as she ended the session. She set the phone face down in her lap, and sat with her hands open. Feeling the slight forward tilt of the aircraft's descent. The pressure change in her ears. The way the light outside the windows shifted, as they descended, through the cloud layer. Gray and formless for a moment. The specific nowhere of being inside a cloud. And then New York. Below them. Laid out in its enormous indifferent grid. The harbor catching the last of the afternoon light. The bridges strung across the water. She thought about what she had just broadcast to 63,000 people. A man sitting still. That's what it was, reduced to its simplest form. A man sitting in a seat on an airplane, not raising his voice, not standing up, not doing anything that the situation would have fully and completely justified. And somehow that stillness being the most powerful thing in the cabin. She didn't have the words for it yet. She knew that. She had learned, over 4 years of doing this, that the things that matter most resist immediate language. They needed time. Distance. The clarity that only came after you had stopped watching and started thinking. She would find the words later. For now she sat with the feeling. Which was already something. Jonah Trevino was reviewing footage on the camera screen. Frame by frame. The meticulous attention of a filmmaker assessing material. The expression of someone realizing, in real time, that what they have is larger than what they went looking for. He would spend 3 weeks editing. He already knew certain things about what the film would be. No music until the final 30 seconds. A single piece. Piano. Simple. The kind of melody that arrives not as emotion but as permission to feel the emotion you have been holding since the beginning. No narrator. No framing device. Just the footage. Beverly's words. Conrad's testimony. The red record lights in a quiet cabin. And the man in seat 2A. Turned toward the window, hands folded in his lap. Sitting with the perfect stillness of someone who has already made all the decisions that matter. He had already decided on the title. 2A, simple. Exact. The kind of title that sounds like nothing until you know what it means, and then it means everything. He was crying again. Not with surprise. Just with acknowledgement. Because he wasn't crying for one man on one flight. He was crying for every version of this moment that had happened in a room without cameras. Without a retired federal judge in the next seat. Without 63,000 people watching. Where the man in the seat simply absorbed what was done to him, and the room moved on, and nothing was named, and nothing was accounted for. That was the film he was going to make. Not about one flight. About all the flights. About all the rooms. In seat 2C, Conrad Wiley had reopened his book. He was actually reading now. Not cataloging. Not observing. Not holding himself in the posture of a man waiting for the next moment that required something from him. Just reading. The uncomplicated pleasure of a man who has said what needed to be said, and has returned to himself. He read 3 pages before the descent announcement. Genuinely in them. For the first time, since Beverly Hartwell rolled the champagne card out of the galley. Constance Whitfield looked at the window. And the expression on her face was the expression of a woman performing, very carefully and very privately, a review of everything she had said in the last 90 minutes. She had said 2 things. 2 small, precise, apparently incidental things. Said to the cabin, not to anyone specifically. Said in the way that certain kinds of people say certain kinds of things, when they want their opinion to exist in the room, without being accountable for having stated it directly. She was accounting for those two things now. Running the math of them. The weight of them. The way Conrad Wiley had looked at her. Briefly. Once. When he said, "I also want to note that the passenger in seat 1A offered verbal reinforcement at 2 separate points. Not loud. Not dramatic. Not a public shaming. Just a notation. For the record. With its full legal weight." She was going to spend the next 3 days drafting an email to her attorney. The attorney was going to tell her, in the measured language of a man who had read many transcripts, that she would not enjoy being a named party in what was coming. She would ultimately decide not to send the email. But first she would draft it. Because she was the kind of person who needed to do something with the discomfort. Who could not simply sit with it. She looked out the window at New York coming up below them. She said nothing. Adrian Meeks stood at the galley curtain. He had been standing there for 7 minutes. Not doing anything. Not restocking snacks. Not checking inventory. Just standing at the curtain gap, looking through it at the front of the cabin. At the profile of the man in 2A. The champagne stain on the cashmere. The folded napkin on the armrest. The glass with one sip gone, from its sitting on the tray table. Something moved across Adrian's face. Not one emotion. A sequence of them. Arriving in the wrong order. None of them arriving at anything he could say. He had made 2 choices on this flight. 2 clear, distinct, fully conscious choices. He had stood in the galley and known. Both times. Exactly what he was doing. The first time he delivered the economy suggestion. The second time he stayed behind the curtain, while Conrad was speaking. 2 chances. 2 choices. Both made in the direction of self-preservation. Both made with the arithmetic of a young man calculating what the safe option cost versus what the right option cost, and choosing the cheaper one. He understood, standing at the curtain gap, what that arithmetic had actually produced. Not safety. Not neutrality. Participation. Quiet. Invisible. Deniable. But participation. He turned around. Went to the small writing pad in the galley drawer. The one used for passenger notes. He picked up a pen. And he began to write. Not fast. Slowly. Precisely. Everything he had seen, since the champagne cart came out the first time. Every word Beverly had said. Every instruction she had given. The economy suggestion. The second pour. His own response to both of those instructions. Written in the handwriting of a person who wants to be able to read this later. Who wants it to exist somewhere outside of his own memory, where memory can blur, and convenience can reshape. He wrote 4 pages. He folded them. Placed them in his breast pocket. He did not know, yet, what he was going to do with what he had written. He just knew that documentation was the only power available to him right now. And he intended to use it. Flight 2261 began its descent into JFK at 4:22 in the afternoon. The cabin lights shifted. Warm amber giving way to cool white, as the aircraft nosed downward. The pressure change subtle. The kind of physical shift that your body notices before your mind does. The couple in row 3 held hands. They had not held hands before the pour. They were quiet now. Close in the way of 2 people who both know they should have spoken sooner, and have silently agreed to carry that knowledge together. Not as an accusation. As a shared weight. The kind you carry not because you chose it, but because you were in the room. Outside the windows, New York sharpened, as the altitude reduced. Rooftops. The long silver run of highway. The harbor. The bridges strung across the water like sentences someone started, and decided to leave open. Nobody in the first-class cabin spoke. This was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of people who have been through something together. Not by choice. Not because they knew each other. But because they were in the same room when it happened. And now they carry it. Individually. But not alone. The wheels touch down at JFK, with the small solid thud of a landing that has been prepared for. And the cabin exhaled. Collectively. The release of something held suspended for a long time being finally allowed to settle. Captain Owen Bassett had given a quiet instruction, before the jet bridge connected. Beverly Hartwell, Adrian Meeks, and Victoria Pham were to exit, before the passengers. No announcement. No drama. Just the efficiency of a captain, who has received an instruction from headquarters and intends to execute it cleanly. Beverly walked the jet bridge in her pressed navy vest. Her coral lipstick. Her gold name badge. Still on. Still catching light. The way it had caught light in the cabin, since the moment she arrived. As though the badge itself didn't know yet. At the end of the jet bridge, the HR director was waiting. A woman in a dark blazer. Tablet in hand. The expression of a professional, who has done this before and has learned that the most respectful way to do it is to be clear. Fast. Complete. A mess. Hartwell. Your employment with Prestige Atlantic Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. Please surrender your crew identification and security badge. Beverly's fingers went to the badge. The gold one. The one she had polished that morning. The way she polished it every morning. The way you maintain something you believe in. She unclipped it. It came away, from the navy vest, with the faint resistance of something that has been attached for a long time. Something that has been part of a surface, so long that the surface remembers its shape even after it's gone. She placed it in the HR director's palm. It made a sound. Small. Specific. The sound of something ending. Adrian Meeks surrendered his badge without drama. Without tears. He stood in the jet bridge, with the expression of a man who has been running a calculation for the last hour, and has arrived at a number he did not want, but cannot dispute. He reached into his breast pocket. The 4 folded pages. He held them out to the HR representative, who stepped forward for his badge. I wrote down everything I witnessed, he said. And everything I didn't do. I want it in the record. The HR representative took the pages. Looked at them. Looked at Adrian. Everything, he said again. He handed over his badge. And stood there for a moment after, in the jet bridge, with the weight of what he had done, and what he had not done sitting in exact, accurate proportion. Not heavier than it was. Not lighter. Just what it was. That was all he could do now. Be precise about what it was. Victoria Pham said nothing to the legal officer, who met her. She had stood behind the galley curtain for the length of the incident, and had watched, through the gap, and had done nothing. She had no defense, that was not made inadequate by the simplest possible fact. She had seen what was happening. She had been close enough to see all of it. And she had chosen, for reasons that had all seemed reasonable at the time, to not act on what she saw. The badge came off. She walked out of the airport, without looking at anything, but the floor in front of her feet. The passengers of Flight 2261 filed past, with their carry-ons, and their footage, and their stories. Conrad Wiley walked past Beverly without slowing. He had his book under his arm. His receipt bookmark sticking out from the pages. He paused exactly 1 step, from where she stood. Not to confront. Not to add anything to what had already been said. He paused because he had something to say, and he was going to say it. He looked at her, with the expression of a man who has delivered verdicts, and knows what follows them. You were skilled at your work, Miss Hartwell. His voice the same voice it had been all flight. Level. Direct. Not unkind. That's what makes this so difficult to see. He walked on. Not looking back. Beverly stood at the end of the jet bridge. The manila envelope in her hands. The termination paperwork. The separation documents. 16 years distilled into a packet of forms that would take less than 10 minutes to process. And a lifetime to stop thinking about. She stood there long, after the last passenger had gone. Alone with what she had done. Which is the truest consequence of any choice. The one that takes the longest to accept. Jonah stopped at row 2A, before leaving the cabin. He had his camera bag on his shoulder, and the slightly dazed expression of a person who has been fully present for something, and is only now beginning to understand what that means for the person they are going to be afterward. He stood at the end of Darnell's row. Darnell looked at him. I want to make this into something, Jonah said. The film. I want to do it right. Darnell looked at him for a moment. The same steady, direct regard he had given everything on this flight. Unhurried. Complete. Make it honest, Darnell said. That's all it needs to be. Jonah nodded. Opened his mouth to say something else. Decided that nothing he added would improve what had just been said. Moved on. Priya went last among the passengers. She paused at his row, and held up her phone. Not to show footage. Not to ask permission. Just to show him the number. 63,000. Still climbing. The video already in her archive. Already being clipped. Already being shared by people she would never meet. They were all watching you sit still, she said. 63,000 people. And you were the calmest person on this plane. Darnell looked at the number. Good, he said quietly. She went. Darnell Okafor was the last person to deplane. He sat in seat 2A, while the first-class cabin emptied around him. The quiet rustle of bags. The soft percussion of overhead bins. The particular sound that a first-class cabin makes when the flight is over and the careful performance of being at ease is no longer required. He watched them go. One by one. The couple from row 3 paused at the end of his row. The woman looked at him. She didn't say anything. She just looked. With the direct, steady regard of a person who wants their presence to communicate what their words can't manage. He nodded. She nodded back. They moved on. Then Conrad. He adjusted his jacket. Picked up his book. Looked at Darnell, with the composed directness of a man who has been direct all his life, and sees no reason to be otherwise now. It was a privilege to witness you, Conrad said. Darnell, it was a privilege to have you in the room. Conrad nodded once. Walked off the plane, with the unhurried gait of a man who has nowhere to be, and who understands that this is one of the finer achievements available to a person who has done his work, and done it well. The cabin was empty now. Just Darnell. The cream leather. The amber light dimming toward cool white. The smell of vanilla and warm air. And underneath it, faint, fading but not, yet gone, the sweetness of moat, that would require a thorough cleaning of seat 2A, before the next flight. He sat in it for another minute. Not for drama. Not for effect. Not for anyone who might be watching. He sat in it because it was his. Because he had built it. Had approved the cut of these seats, and the amber warmth of these overhead lights, and the signature scent that visitors to every prestige Atlantic lounge recognized before they even looked up from their phones. He had built all of it. Out of the patient, documented determination of a man who had been told. At various points across 26 years of building. That he was in the wrong place. He had never been in the wrong place. He stood. Picked up the briefcase. Walked out of the cabin without looking back. At the end of the jet bridge, 4 people were waiting. 2 from HR. 2 from legal. Dark suits. They straightened slightly when Darnell appeared. He raised one hand. Monday. My office. 9 a.m. He walked past them. 3 weeks later. Darnell Okafor sat at his desk in the Manhattan headquarters of Prestige Atlantic Airlines on a Monday morning, with a legal pad in front of him. Not the original one. That was gone. Lost somewhere in the first few years of actually building the thing he'd written at the bottom of it. But the habit remained. The habit of writing things down by hand, when they mattered. The habit of choosing words carefully, when those words would have weight. He wrote the zero-tolerance policy himself. 1 draft. No committee. No legal review first. No working group. He knew what he wanted to say. He had known for 26 years. Every act of discrimination against a passenger. In service, in language, or in the assumptions that precede either. Is grounds for immediate termination. No review period. No second warnings. We do not get this wrong twice. He looked at it. Read it once more. Then at the bottom, in a different paragraph. The last one. The one that would appear in every crew handbook, on every breakroom bulletin board, in every onboarding packet, from this day forward. The passenger you don't recognize may be the one who built this company. Treat every one of them as though they did. He didn't hold a press conference. He sent the policy, through the internal system, with a 2-paragraph note. No mention of Flight 2261. No mention of Beverly Hartwell. No mention of the footage that was still circulating. No mention of the hashtag that had trended for 9 days. Just the policy. And the note. And the last sentence. The complaint history was reviewed. All 9 files. The 7 that remained, and the 2 recovered, from the backup archive. The deleted files. Wiped from the primary system using admin credentials issued in 2020, and never revoked. Were restored and added to the official record. The previous supervisor, who had signed off on the closed files, was invited to a meeting, with HR and Prestige Atlantic's legal team. He came with his own attorney. The meeting lasted 2 hours. A settlement was reached. The terms were not disclosed. But the files were opened. The records were corrected. And the audit of complaint histories across all first-class crews was scheduled to begin the following month. Jonah Trevino's film premiered 6 weeks after the flight. 11 minutes and 20 seconds. No music until the final 30 seconds. A single piece. Piano. Simple. The kind of melody that arrives not as emotion but as permission to feel the emotion you have been holding since the beginning. No narrator. No framing device. Just the footage. Beverly's words. Conrad's testimony. The red record lights in a quiet cabin. And the man in seat 2A. Turned toward the window, hands folded in his lap, the champagne drying on his sweater in the shape of something being erased. Sitting with the stillness of someone who has already made all the decisions that matter. The film was nominated for a short documentary award. At the ceremony, Jonah dedicated it. Not to Darnell Okafor. To the people the film was actually about. Every person who was refused something they had already paid for. Who had to sit quietly and wait. In rooms without cameras. Without judges in the next seat. Without 63,000 people watching. In the audience, someone started a standing ovation, from the 4th row, before the rest of the room understood what was happening. She stood before the room. The room followed. Conrad Wiley sent a letter. 2 pages. Blue ink. Precise and warm in equal measure. He invited Darnell to dinner at his home in Connecticut. Darnell accepted. They ate simply. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the flight. Not about the airline. Not about any of the things that the world was saying about both of them in the weeks after the footage spread. They talked about what comes after justice. Which is harder and quieter and more important. Which requires a different kind of patience than the patience Darnell had shown on the plane. The kind of patience that doesn't get filmed, or applauded or shared. The kind that simply shows up every morning and does the work. The kind that builds things. Slowly. Completely. Conrad, who had spent 41 years watching the aftermath of verdicts, believed this was the only work that actually lasted. Darnell, who had spent 26 years building something out of a legal pad decision and a one-way ticket home from Birmingham, did not disagree. Darnell Okafor never spoke publicly about Flight 2261. No interviews. No statement. No press event. No confirmation or denial of the footage. No comment on the hashtag that trended for 9 days across every major platform. He simply went back to work. The same work he had always done. Building something that was supposed to be better than what he inherited. That was supposed to carry people from one place to another, without asking them first to prove they deserved to be carried. The terminal at JFK was doing what airports always did. Moving. Thousands of people pulling thousands of bags through thousands of feet of polished corridor. Nobody looking at each other. All of them in a hurry. All of them going somewhere. Darnell found a quiet section near a window, after walking past the HR team. Ground level. The tarmac visible outside. Ground crew in orange vests moving, with the coordinated efficiency of a system that works when everyone in it does their job. He sat down. Put his briefcase on his knee. Took out his phone. And called. Gloria Okafor picked up on the second ring. She was 71 years old. She had worked hotel rooms for 28 years. She had pressed a blue shirt at 5:17 in the morning in a pale yellow kitchen, and said "Call me when you land," and she had been saying it every time he flew, since he was 19 years old, and she was not going to stop now. "I landed," he said. "I know." A pause. The pause of a woman who has been waiting and is now settling. "How was it?" "Fine." "Darnell." "Mom." "Fine like nothing happened." "Or fine like you." He looked out the terminal window. The tarmac in late afternoon light. The orange vests. The careful coordinated movement of people doing their jobs. "Fine like me." She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that contains things. "You sound tired." "Long flight." "Long flight or long life?" He almost smiled. "Almost." "Both." "Did something happen?" He looked at the tarmac. At the planes lined up at their gates. His planes. His routes. His airline. Built out of 3 aircraft, and a legal pad, and a decision made in an airport at the age of 19 by a boy, who had just lost something he worked very hard to earn. Who responded to that loss not by giving up. Not by giving in. By writing down what happened and deciding. In the clear-eyed way of a person who is done being surprised by the world, and is now interested in changing it. Exactly what he was going to build instead. "Yeah," he said. "Something happened." "You okay?" He thought about the napkin wipe. The boarding pass dropped. The champagne in a slow deliberate stream onto charcoal cashmere. The 6 hours in a Birmingham airport at 19. The 3 planes. The 11 years. The cabin he'd approved the scent he'd selected, the lights he'd specified. All of it. He thought about Conrad Wiley standing up without rushing. About Jonah behind the camera, with tears he didn't bother hiding. About Priya and 63,000 people watching a man sit still. He thought about the glass of champagne carried, from the galley by a captain. Set down carefully on his tray table. Received with one quiet sip. Received. Not won. Not vindicated. Not proven. Just received. The thing that had always been his. Finally, quietly, simply his. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. Okay, like you're saying it to stop me worrying. Okay, like I am. Another pause. The warm pause of a woman, who knows her son. Who has known him, since he was 4 years old in a house they lived in together. Who has heard every version of the word fine, and the word okay he has ever produced. And who knows? Without needing to be told. The difference between the ones, that mean nothing happened, and the ones, that mean I went, through something and I came, through it and I am still exactly myself. She heard it now. Okay, she said. And then, come home. He stood. Picked up his briefcase. I will. He walked out of the airport, into the late afternoon light. The city was doing what it always did. Moving. And somewhere above the clouds. On the same routes he had built. The planes kept flying. Carrying people from one place to another. Without asking anyone first to prove they deserved to be carried. That was the point. That had always been the point. From the first word he had written on a legal pad in an airport at 19. To this. The seat was always his. It had always been his. From the first moment he sat down in it. End.